This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by cdevolution.org.
I know, you got,
So are you trying to block me from getting pictures?
I'm saying it's kind of cloudy.
I want to bring you now some details from the Ed and Elaine Brown trial, June 30th. The two are tax protesters who holed up in their home for almost 9 months and led a standoff against U.S. Marshals. Here is what I saw during Head Marshal Stephen Monier's testimony. A little before noon, a tall, attractive female attorney, presumably from the U.S. Attorney's Office, stands before the court. She is a stereotypical lawyer, terse, stern, loud, condescending, even to Monier. When Monier takes the stand, she begins questioning him. The defense objects frequently. Most of her questioning is not particularly interesting. It has to do with details of the Marshals' interactions with the Browns. Defense objections center around the fact that many of Monier's answers contain hearsay. The judge seems to agree, but allows Monier to answer so that he can show why he did what he did. Monier led, or at least helped lead, the efforts to take the Browns into custody. Monier accused Brown of being part of a militia group. He showed aerial surveillance photos of their house. He described the 2004 effort to imprison Ed Brown as, quote, subterfuge, unquote. At least I think that's the arrest he was talking about. He may have been talking about a different arrest, but I think it was the 2004 arrest. Monier is soft-spoken, soothing, non-dramatic in his presentation of events. He is drastically thinner than the man you see in these pictures. He tells me that day he is on his way out as U.S. Marshal. He cannot comment to me regarding the case, but that he is on his way out as head U.S. Marshal. That a vetting process has begun to find his replacement. He tells the Browns are a, quote, case that has national implications, unquote. He says it was not feasible to surround the house. But also, he says it would have taken options off the table, including infiltration. The defense objected to his representation of why supporters came to the Brown house. If I recall correctly, he was essentially saying they were there to help prevent the Browns from being arrested. The overbearing female attorney asks Monier why he didn't just go in with force right off the bat. He says it was partly because the Browns were armed and that he didn't think it would be safe. And he made a revelation that was news to me. He said there were U.S. Marshals or deputies in the area essentially all the time. He described small sweeps of 1 to 5 deputies, mostly using vehicular or aerial surveillance. He said the National Guard was used, but only as a backup force. Specifically, he mentioned a biohazard unit from the National Guard and said it was purely supporting. Although I do find it disturbing that the National Guard was involved, it's probably good to remember that one of the key criticisms after the Waco fire is that authorities did not have enough forces in place to combat the fire. They didn't have the support forces they needed. That was a complaint, if I recall correctly, posed by the mainstream media and anti-government activists at the time. Defense continued objecting. More objections than not were sustained, as best I could tell. And that's all I recall from the Monier testimony, the only interesting stuff I recall. I will say, though, that spread out throughout what I'll call the federal area of the courtroom as opposed to the gallery, was exhibit after exhibit after exhibit. Searchlights, what appear to be flak jackets, helmets, camos, the kinds of equipment federal authorities frequently abuse. But they were pieces of equipment allegedly belonging to the Browns before they were seized. Walking past this stack of stolen items, Elaine and Ed Brown leave the room as there is a recess. Monier's testimony is not over, but is to be continued later in the day. I speak to Elaine after Ed has gone. I say her name. She looks in my direction and doesn't seem to recognize me. I say, Dave Ridley. Then she seems to brighten slightly. I ask her how she's doing. Then she is forced out of the room. Her husband Ed looks the same as he did before, but Elaine Brown has aged significantly. Shortly thereafter, a man in a suit approaches me, tells me he is a U.S. Marshal, and says I am not allowed to communicate with the defendant. I make no representations as to what I will or won't do, but ask him his name. He gives it to me, I forget it, and the trial resumes. Have the stories of civil disobedience in New Hampshire inspired you? Are you frustrated at your inability to participate? Well, be frustrated no longer. Now you can pitch in. The Civil Disobedience Evolution Fund allows you to assist these gutsy activists as they make a stand for your liberties. Find out more at cdevolution.org.